You're under arrest.
That is the moment a 9-year veteran of the Fairview County Emergency Communications Center stopped being a dispatcher and became a defendant.
I didn't do anything wrong. I was doing my job.
Derek Allen Morrow was born on March 22, 1987, in Fairview County. The oldest of 2 boys, his father, Gerald Morrow, drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery distribution chain for 28 years. His mother, Patrice, worked the front desk at a pediatric clinic on Elm Street until Derek started high school, then went back full-time when his younger brother Jason enrolled at community college. They lived in a beige split-level house on Clearwater Drive, 3 blocks from the elementary school Derek attended, 2 blocks from the church where his parents had been married in 1983. The neighborhood was the kind where people left their screen doors unlocked until 10 at night and showed up with food when someone had surgery. Derek was not a remarkable child. His teachers, when investigators later interviewed them, described him the way teachers describe children who neither fail nor distinguish themselves. Cooperative, present, not a problem. He played 2 years of junior varsity baseball at Fairview Central High School and quit his junior year to take a part-time job stocking shelves at a hardware store on Route 7. He needed the money. He liked the quiet of the early morning shift before the store opened. He graduated in 2005. His yearbook photo shows a young man in a collared shirt, not smiling, not frowning, looking directly at the camera, waiting for it to be over.
In June of 2012, at 25 years old, Derek Morrow applied for an open dispatcher position at the Fairview County Emergency Communications Center. He listed all 4 previous call handling jobs on his application. He passed the typing assessment at 68 words per minute. He passed the multitasking simulation. He passed the psychological evaluation. He passed the background check. There was nothing on his record because there had never been anything on his record. He was hired the following month, and he started on the day shift, and within a year he was handling the evening queue, and within 3 years he had been cross-trained on every call type in the building: medical, fire, law enforcement, and domestic. Derek Morrow never requested reassignment from the DVQ. His supervisors documented this as composure under pressure. A performance review from 2017 reads, verbatim, in the section marked Call Handling Strengths. Dispatcher Morrow handles high-stress call types with consistent composure and shows no signs of secondary trauma response. A reliable presence on the domestic queue. Recommend for lead consideration. In March of 2021, that consideration became official. Derek Morrow was promoted to lead dispatcher on the evening shift. His salary increased by $4,200 annually. He was given a secondary level of administrative access to the routing configuration panel, the software layer that determines, based on GPS location data and caller area code, which calls go to which dispatch queue. The access was not unusual for a lead dispatcher. Fewer than 6 people in the building had it. It existed because routing errors happened in real time during system updates or tower outages, and someone needed to be able to correct them manually without waiting for IT. The access was a tool, a maintenance tool. It was meant to fix problems. Derek Morrow spent the next 2 years learning everything about it. He read the technical documentation. He attended 3 vendor training sessions on the CAD architecture. He asked questions of the IT contractor who came in quarterly to run system checks. Questions framed as curiosity, as professional development, as the kind of thing a conscientious lead dispatcher would naturally want to understand. By the summer of 2023, Derek Morrow understood the routing configuration panel better than anyone else in the building, possibly better than the people who had installed it. And he had found something. Derek Morrow executed the override at 11:47 in the evening during a quiet Tuesday shift. from Console 7 using his own login credentials. The change took 23 seconds. It generated one routing maintenance log entry, categorized as standard. No supervisor review was required. No notification was generated to any other system user. No alert was triggered. The system accepted the change. It registered it as maintenance. And from that moment forward, every domestic violence call placed from a Fairview County address by a caller with a Hendricks County area code was silently, automatically, invisibly routed 47 miles west. On September 5th, 2023, the first domestic violence call processed under the new configuration was placed at 2:14 in the morning by a woman named Anita Garza, 38 years old, who had locked herself in a second-floor bathroom on Briar Street while her boyfriend of 4 years destroyed the living room furniture below her. Anita had a Hendricks County area code. She had moved to Fairview 19 months earlier and never changed her number. Her call routed to Hendricks. The dispatcher who answered was 11 months into the job. He recognized the Fairview address, flagged the call as a transfer error, and attempted the transfer bridge twice. Both times, busy signal. By then, Anita Garza had already been transported to Fairview General Hospital. A neighbor had eventually called from a landline with a Fairview number. That call routed correctly. That call sent the units. Anita survived with a fractured cheekbone and a dislocated shoulder. One dispatcher at Hendricks County did step back. His name was Marcus Webb, 26 years old, 11 months into the job when the first misrouted Fairview call landed on his console in September of 2023. By November, he had started keeping an informal tally on a notepad he kept in his top left desk drawer. Not an official log, not anything he had been asked to keep, just his own record of something that felt wrong. By April of 2024, the tally had reached a number that made him pick up the phone and call Fairview Dispatch directly instead of filing another transfer error report. Cassandra Marie Pruitt was 29 years old. She had grown up in Hendricks County, the younger of two daughters. Her father, James Pruitt, was a high school history teacher. Her mother, Carol, managed the front office at a dental practice on Route 12. Cassandra had followed her mother into the profession. She had been a dental hygienist at a small private practice on Commerce Avenue in Fairview for just over a year, a job she had found after moving east in the fall of 2022 to be closer to her older sister, Renata, who had lived in Fairview for 3 years. Cassandra was, by the accounts of everyone who spoke to investigators, the kind of person who showed up. For her patients, for her coworkers, for her sister. She volunteered 3 Saturdays a month at a community food pantry on Garden Street, 2 blocks from her apartment. She was taking an online course in dental office administration because she wanted to eventually manage her own practice. She had plans. They were specific and considered, and, by every measure available, entirely reasonable. She had left her marriage in the spring of 2022. Her husband, Warren Pruitt, was 34 years old, a former equipment operator who had been between jobs for the better part of 2 years. Warren had 2 prior domestic violence charges on his record, the first from 2018, filed by Cassandra's sister Renata after an incident at a family gathering, the second from 2020, filed by Cassandra herself after an incident at the house they had shared on Millbrook Road in Hendricks County. Both charges had been reduced, the first to disorderly conduct, the second to disorderly conduct. Cassandra had moved to Fairview specifically because it was distance. It was 47 miles between her apartment on Garden Street and Warren Pruitt's most recent known address in Hendricks County. She had kept her Hendricks County phone number. She told Renata she had been meaning to change it. She just hadn't gotten around to it. Cassandra was, by the accounts of everyone who spoke to investigators, the kind of person who showed up. for her patients, for her coworkers, for her sister. She volunteered 3 Saturdays a month at a community food pantry on Garden Street, 2 blocks from her apartment. She had a spare key. Cassandra had given it to her when she moved in. In case of anything, she had said. You know, just in case. On the evening of January 18th, 2024, a Thursday, Warren Pruitt drove 47 miles from Hendricks County and arrived at Cassandra's apartment building at approximately 9 in the evening. A neighbor would later tell investigators he had heard a man's voice in the second-floor hallway around 9:15. Another neighbor, Glenn Ashby, a retired postal worker who lived in the unit directly below Cassandra's, said he had been aware of raised voices through the ceiling for approximately 2 hours. He had stood at the bottom of the stairwell around 11:45, listening, trying to decide whether to call someone. He had decided to give it a few more minutes. At 11:52 in the evening, Cassandra Pruitt dialed 911 from her kitchen. The call routed to the Hendricks County Emergency Communications Center at 11:52 and 14 seconds. The dispatcher who received it was a woman named Diane Polk, a 6-year veteran on the overnight shift. Diane heard the address, Garden Street, Fairview, and recognized immediately that the call was outside her service area. She flagged it as a transfer error. She attempted the inter-county transfer bridge. Busy signal. She tried again. Busy signal. She placed the call in administrative hold and began drafting the transfer error report. She would later tell investigators that during the approximately 45 seconds she spent attempting the transfer, she could hear a woman's voice on the line. Low, controlled, the voice of someone trying not to be heard. The call was still in the hold queue when, at 11:54 in the evening, it disconnected. At 9:20 in the morning, Renata Pruitt called her sister's cell phone. No answer. She called again at 9:35. No answer. She called a third time at 9:50. No answer. At 10:05, she drove to Garden Street. She had a spare key. Cassandra had given it to her when she moved in. In case of anything, she had said. You know, just in case. Renata used the key. She opened the door. She called her sister's name from the hallway before she saw her. Renata Pruitt's attorney forwarded those 3 pages to the State Attorney General's office on March 18th, 2024. The state AG's office had already received a separate referral from the Emergency Communications Oversight Board on April 8th. The 2 referrals landed on the same desk. The same investigator opened both files. Her name was Janet Okafor. Supervisory investigator Janet Okafor was 51 years old, 15 years in the State Attorney General's Public Integrity Division. Before that, 4 years as a federal contractor on financial crimes investigations. Before that, 11 years in the county prosecutor's office. She was not the kind of investigator who assumed things were accidents. She was the kind who started with the question, who benefited? She was assigned to the Fairview case on April 9th, 2024. By April 11th, she had a full forensic imaging team inside the Emergency Communications Center. By April 18th, she had a preliminary read on the routing configuration logs going back 18 months. And by April 22nd, she had a name. 1 log entry, 1 set of credentials. 1 lead dispatcher with secondary administrative access who had executed a 23-second routing maintenance command on a quiet Tuesday evening and never reversed it. That login, 11:49 in the evening. Morrow had been off duty since 6 p.m. He had accessed the routing panel remotely from his personal laptop through the department's maintenance VPN, using his lead dispatcher credentials. He had stayed logged in for 6 minutes. He had logged off at 11:55, 83 seconds after Cassandra Pruitt's call disconnected in Hendricks County. The routing override he had installed in September was still active. Cassandra's call would have routed to Hendricks regardless of anything he did that night. The override did not require his presence to function. Investigator Okafor did not, in her report, make a direct claim about what he had done during those 6 minutes at his home computer. She did not need to. She placed his login beside Cassandra Pruitt's call in the record, noted the timestamp of his logout against the timestamp of the disconnection, and let the mathematics speak. The warrant for Derek Morrow's personal devices was signed on May 2nd. His home was searched on the morning of May 3rd while he was on shift. He did not know it was happening. What investigators found on his laptop took 3 days to fully document. The forensic summary, filed on May 1st and supplemented on May 7th, was 94 pages. The significant findings were 3. The first was a spreadsheet, saved in a folder labeled Shift Notes on the desktop of his personal laptop. The spreadsheet contained 3 columns. Column A, dates. Column B, times. Column C, call reference numbers, formatted in the same alphanumeric structure used by the Fairview CAD system. There were 41 rows. When investigators cross-referenced every reference number in the spreadsheet against the Fairview call database, every single one corresponded to a domestic violence call that had been misrouted under the override during the 8-month period. Not some of them, all 41. He had been keeping his own log of the calls the system had rerouted. He had been tracking them from home, manually, against the official database, apparently verifying that the override was working. The spreadsheet had no title. It had no labels on the columns. It had no explanatory notes. It was simply a list, maintained with the precision of a man who cared about accuracy. The second finding was a photograph, a screenshot saved to the Downloads folder of the Fairview County Emergency Communication Center's public-facing service coverage map. The map on the county website that shows residents which dispatch center serves their area. The screenshot had been taken on August 14th, 2023, 3 weeks before the routing override was installed. Someone had printed it, drawn a circle on it in red pen around the eastern edge of Fairview County, the section of the county with the highest concentration of residents holding Hendricks County area codes due to the population shift of the previous decade, photographed the annotated printout, and saved the photo to the laptop. August 14th, 3 weeks of planning between that screenshot and September 4th. The third finding was a series of text messages between Derek Morrow and a contact identified in his phone only as R. The messages began on August 11th, 2023, 3 days before the screenshot. The content of those messages is currently under a sealed protective order as a result of their direct relevance to the pending murder trial of Warren Pruitt and has not been made public. Investigator Okafor referenced the messages in the AG's filing as communications material to the establishment of motive and noted that they were being held under seal pending resolution of the related criminal proceeding. She did not characterize them further in the public record, but the warrant for Derek Morrow's arrest listed in its supporting probable cause affidavit the following sequence of facts: contact with R beginning August 11th, annotated service map saved August 14th, routing override executed September 4th, 41 confirmed misrouted DV calls over the following 8 months, personal spreadsheet tracking those calls, and a remote VPN login to the Fairview dispatch routing panel from Derek Morrow's home IP address at 11:49 on the night of January 18th, 2024. That login, 11:49 in the evening. Morrow had been off duty since 6 p.m. He had accessed the routing panel remotely from his personal laptop through the department's maintenance VPN, using his lead dispatcher credentials. He had stayed logged in for 6 minutes. He had logged off at 11:55, 83 seconds after Cassandra Pruitt's call disconnected in Hendricks County. The routing override he had installed in September was still active. Cassandra's call would have routed to Hendricks regardless of anything he did that night. The override did not require his presence to function. Investigator Okafor did not, in her report, make a direct claim about what he had done during those 6 minutes at his home computer. She did not need to. She placed his login beside Cassandra Pruitt's call in the record, noted the timestamp of his logout against the timestamp of the disconnection, and let the mathematics speak. The arrest warrant was signed on May 7, 2024, at 3:22 in the afternoon. At 6:08 in the morning on May 8, 2024, Supervisory Investigator Janet Okafor and 4 law enforcement officers, 2 from the State Attorney General's Division and 2 Fairview County Sheriff's deputies, entered the Fairview County Emergency Communications Center through the main entrance. They did not stop at the front desk. They did not check in with the duty sergeant. They did not take the elevator. They took the stairs to the second floor and walked directly across the dispatch floor to Console 7. Derek Morrow was on shift. He was seated at his console with a call in his headset, a bottle of water at his left elbow, and a granola bar still in its wrapper beside his keyboard. He was logging a call. His screen showed the routing panel. He did not look up when they entered because dispatchers on active calls are trained not to look up. Investigator Okafor waited. She stood 2 feet behind his chair and waited until the call was logged and his headset went quiet. Derek Morrow, step away from the console. He turned around. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the people standing behind her. I'm mid-shift. Step away from the console, now. He stood slowly. He pushed his chair back. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for anything. One of the deputies moved to his left side, the other to his right. Derek Morrow, you are under arrest. Do not resist. For what? For what? Turn around, hands behind your back. He turned around. He placed his hands behind his back. The handcuffs went on at 6:11 in the morning. 11 dispatchers were on shift. They had all gone still. Some had pulled their headsets down around their necks. Some had turned in their chairs. No one spoke. The floor was quiet in a way that dispatch floors are almost never quiet. Every call system active, every screen lit, every console staffed, and the only sound in the room, the soft electrical hum of equipment that did not stop running simply because a man in the middle of it was being arrested. Derek Morrow was walked across the floor toward the exit. Investigator Okafor walked behind him. The 2 AG deputies flanked him. The Fairview County deputies held the doors. Console 7, the DVQ lead station, the console where he had been sitting, was powered down and tagged as evidence before the elevator reached the ground floor. He did not look back at the room, not once. He looked straight ahead at the door at the end of the hall, and he walked toward it, and one of the investigators who was present that morning would later say, in a deposition, that Derek Morrow walked out of the building the way a man walks out of a place he already knows he will never return to, without hurrying, without hesitating, with the flat affect of a person who has been calculating the distance between the thing he did and the morning it catches up to him for a very long time, and has simply arrived at the number. After the arrest, the full scope of what Derek Morrow had built took investigators another 4 weeks to map completely. The 94-page forensic summary was expanded to 161 pages. The State Emergency Communications Oversight Board, the body responsible for auditing dispatch centers across the state, was asked to provide its own review records for Fairview County going back 5 years. What the board produced was a file that investigator Okafor later described, in testimony before a state legislative subcommittee, as the clearest evidence of regulatory failure I have encountered in 15 years of public integrity work. The Oversight Board had conducted one formal audit of the Fairview County Emergency Communications Center in the previous 5 years. 1. It had been a paper audit, a review of submitted compliance documents, not a technical inspection of the routing software. The lead auditor had noted no concerns. The audit had been closed in 11 days. The board had not met as a full body in 14 months. 3 of its 7 seats were vacant. The inter-county transfer bridge, the broken phone line between Fairview and Hendricks, the line that had been generating busy signals since October of 2022, had been the subject of a repair ticket filed by the Hendricks County IT department. The ticket had been forwarded to Fairview County IT. Fairview County IT had logged it as low priority. In 19 months, no follow-up action had been taken. The estimated cost of the repair, when investigators finally obtained it, was $412 in parts and 2 hours of labor. $412. 19 months. 61 calls. The routing configuration panel itself, the tool that had allowed a lead dispatcher to execute a call-type specific override without supervisor review or dual authorization, was found, upon review of the vendor's documentation, to have contained a recommended security setting that Fairview County had never enabled. The setting required a second administrator to approve any routing configuration change before it took effect. It had been available since the system was installed in 2016. It had never been turned on. The county IT director, when asked in a deposition why it had not been enabled, said he had not been aware the setting existed. What investigators had built by the time the indictment was filed was not just a case against one dispatcher. It was a case against every gap that had made one dispatcher possible. The indictment of Derek Allen Morrow was filed on June 14, 2024. 33 counts. 1 count of criminally negligent homicide in connection with the death of Cassandra Marie Pruitt. 22 counts of official misconduct, 1 for each of the 22 confirmed domestic violence calls that received no law enforcement response under the routing override configuration. 4 counts of unauthorized computer access, corresponding to the 4 confirmed remote login sessions Derek Morrow had conducted from his personal laptop through the department's maintenance VPN during off-duty hours. 3 counts of evidence tampering, based on evidence that he had reclassified 3 routing log entries in the weeks following the initial IT discovery in order to obscure the timing of the configuration change. 2 counts of obstruction of justice related to statements he made to supervisors after the IT department first identified the override. 1 count of conspiracy, the specifics of which remain under seal pending the resolution of the Warren Pruitt murder trial in Hendricks County. Derek Morrow entered a plea of not guilty on July 2, 2024. His attorney, Patricia Hahn, a criminal defense lawyer with 19 years of experience in public sector cases, filed 4 pretrial motions. The first sought to suppress the routing log evidence on the grounds that the forensic imaging warrant had exceeded its authorized scope. Denied. The second sought to suppress the spreadsheet and photograph found on his personal laptop on the grounds that the home search warrant had been issued without sufficient probable cause, independent of the routing logs. Denied. The third sought to suppress the text messages with the contact identified as R, on the grounds that the sealed protective order in the Warren Pruitt case had been improperly used to avoid disclosing their content to the defense team. This motion was stayed pending coordination with the Hendricks County Court. The fourth sought dismissal of the criminally negligent homicide count on the grounds that the connection between the routing override and Cassandra Pruitt's death required too many intervening steps to establish legal causation. Denied. Judge Miriam Talbot, presiding, wrote in her ruling on the fourth motion that the prosecution's theory of causation was direct, documented, and supported by a forensic record of exceptional specificity. She further noted that the defendant's personal tracking of the misrouted calls demonstrated a conscious and sustained awareness of the consequences of the configuration change that is inconsistent with any theory of accidental or good faith error. The trial began on October 14, 2024, and lasted 11 days. The prosecution called 19 witnesses. The defense called 3. Among the prosecution witnesses, Marcus Webb, the Hendricks County dispatcher, who had kept the informal tally and made the call to Fairview supervisor Linda Cho in April. He testified for 40 minutes about the volume of misrouted calls he had personally received, about the busy signals on the transfer bridge, about the growing sense that something was structurally wrong. He brought the notepad. He was permitted to introduce it as a demonstrative exhibit. It contained 43 entries in his own handwriting, dating from October 2023 to April 2024. The jury looked at it for a long time. Among the prosecution witnesses, Anita Garza, who described calling 911 from a locked bathroom while her boyfriend destroyed her living room furniture below her, being told by a stranger in another county that help was coming, and waiting 34 minutes for officers to arrive because a neighbor had eventually called from a landline. She described the fractures. She described the surgery. She described the 18 months of telling herself it was just bad luck, just a glitch, just the way the system sometimes failed, before she learned that it had not been a glitch at all. Among the prosecution witnesses, Renata Pruitt. She testified last, before closing arguments. She stood at the lectern for 47 minutes, and she was precise. She described the spare key. She described the 3 phone calls that morning, 9:20, 9:35, 9:50, and the way each one rang and went to voicemail, and the way the silence on the other end of the voicemail felt different from the silences she was used to. Heavier, without texture, like something had been removed from it. She described driving to Garden Street. She described the key in the lock. She described calling her sister's name from the hallway. She described one more thing. She described standing in the kitchen of that apartment weeks later, after the investigators had released it, trying to understand how her sister could have done everything right. Moved to a new city, kept her doors locked, called the number you are supposed to call when someone is trying to hurt you, and ended up on that floor. She said she had a Hendricks County phone number because she grew up there. She didn't change it because she was 29 years old and she had 1,000 things to do, and changing your phone number feels like something you do eventually. I had the same number for 6 years before I changed mine. So did you, probably. So did most of us. The courtroom was quiet for a long time after she returned to her seat. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and 14 minutes. They returned guilty verdicts on 29 of the 33 counts. The 4 unauthorized computer access charges were consolidated into 2 by the judge prior to deliberation. The 2 obstruction charges were consolidated into 1. Every substantive charge, the homicide count, all 22 misconduct counts, the evidence tampering counts, stood. Sentencing was held on December 9, 2024, in courtroom 4B of the Fairview County Superior Court. The gallery was full. 14 individuals and family members had submitted requests to deliver victim impact statements. The hearing lasted 4 hours and 51 minutes. Renata Pruitt spoke first. She had already testified at trial. She had already stood at a lectern in the same building and described the same kitchen and the same silence. She did not repeat herself. She said 2 things. She said her sister had been 29 years old and had plans and had been good at her job and had volunteered on Saturdays at a food pantry 2 blocks from her apartment and had been taking an online course because she wanted to manage a dental practice someday. She said, "None of that is relevant to what he did. I just need you to know who she was before you tell him how long he has to think about it." Anita Garza spoke. 3 other women who had been among the 41 unresponded calls spoke. One of them had never previously disclosed what had happened that night to anyone outside her immediate family. She had told her mother it had been a bad night and left it at that and tried to move forward. She stood at the lectern and said she was speaking because the person who had been on the other end of her 911 call that night had not been an accident or a system error or a piece of bad luck. He had been a person who had made a decision. She wanted him to hear her say that out loud. When the impact statements had concluded, Judge Miriam Talbot addressed Derek Morrow directly. She had the sentencing recommendation documents open in front of her, but she did not look at them when she spoke. "Mr. Morrow, this court has spent 11 days reviewing what you did, and, more importantly, how long it took you to do it. There are cases that come before this bench that begin with a moment of terrible judgment, a second, an impulse, a decision made in the heat of circumstances that couldn't be foreseen. This is not that kind of case. You researched the system you had been trusted to maintain. You identified a specific population within your service area. You annotated a map. You waited 3 weeks. You executed a change in 23 seconds during a quiet Tuesday shift. And then you went home. And the next morning you came back to work and sat down at that console and took calls, including calls from the people your override was routing away, for 8 months. You kept a spreadsheet. You logged into the system from your home at midnight and confirmed your work. You were not negligent. Negligence requires the absence of care. What you demonstrated over 8 months with a spreadsheet and a map and a remote login from your living room was the consistent, patient presence of care directed entirely toward harm. You were given a headset and a console and a credential and access to a system that 400,000 people trusted without knowing they were trusting it. You turned that trust into a mechanism. You aimed it. And one of the people it hit was a 29-year-old woman who had moved to this county to be safe, who locked her door and called the number she was supposed to call, and who spent 1 minute and 43 seconds on the line with a dispatcher in a county 47 miles away who could not help her before the call disconnected and no one came. The sentence, 18 years in state prison. No possibility of parole for 11 years. $1.4 million in restitution to the estate of Cassandra Marie Pruitt, to be dispersed to her sister and next of kin, Renata Pruitt. Permanent revocation of his state dispatcher certification. A lifetime ban from employment in any public safety communications role in the state. Mandatory cooperation with the ongoing investigation in connection with the Warren Pruitt murder trial, including full disclosure of all communications with the contact identified as R once the protective seal is lifted. Derek Allen Morrow, lead dispatcher, 9-year veteran of the Fairview County Emergency Communications Center, did not speak at his sentencing. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at Renata Pruitt. He looked at the table in front of him, and when the gavel came down, he was escorted out of the room through the side door. He is currently incarcerated at the Fairview State Correctional Facility intake unit. His earliest possible release date under the parole eligibility terms of his sentence is May of 2035. He is 37 years old. In the weeks following the sentencing, the state moved quickly. The Emergency Communications Oversight Board was formally dissolved on January 6, 2025, and replaced with a newly constituted body under the direct authority of the State Attorney General's office, with mandatory funding requirements, a full 7-member panel, and a charter requiring no fewer than 2 in-person technical inspections of each state dispatch center per year. 14 new operational requirements were issued for all county dispatch centers statewide. Among them, mandatory dual approval authorization for any routing configuration change, requiring the signatures of both a lead dispatcher and a supervising administrator before any modification takes effect. Real-time logging and external monitoring of all remote VPN access to dispatch systems, with alerts to a third-party oversight contractor for any off-hours access. Quarterly third-party audits of all routing maintenance entries, conducted by an independent firm with no affiliation to the county government, and a requirement that all inter-county transfer line faults be classified as Priority 1 repair tickets, with a mandatory resolution window of 72 hours. The inter-county transfer line between Fairview and Hendricks County, the line that had been generating busy signals since October of 2022, was repaired on January 14, 2025. It took one technician 4 hours and cost the county $388 in parts. The routing configuration panel used by the Fairview County Emergency Communications Center was updated by the software vendor on January 22, 2025. The dual authorization security setting, the setting that had been available since 2016 and never enabled, was turned on by default for every installation of the software statewide. The vendor's update notes described it as a critical security patch. Marcus Webb, the Hendricks County dispatcher, who had kept a notepad tally and made the phone call that started everything, received a formal commendation from the reconstituted Emergency Communications Oversight Board in February of 2025. The commendation cited his sustained documentation of a systemic error in the absence of official protocols for doing so, and his direct communication with the originating county that initiated the chain of events leading to the identification of criminal conduct. He kept the notepad. He is still working the evening shift at Hendricks County. Supervisory investigator Janet Okafor was asked in a legislative subcommittee hearing in March of 2025 whether she believed the routing override had been designed specifically to route Cassandra Pruitt's calls away from Fairview Dispatch on the night of January 18th. She considered the question for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't believe he knew it would be her specifically. I believe he knew it would be someone. I believe he knew what kind of someone. I believe he knew what night that kind of someone most needed to be unreachable. And I believe the spreadsheet and the map and the login at 11:49 tell us that he was paying attention to whether it was working." Renata Pruitt filed a civil suit against Fairview County on February 3, 2025, alleging systemic negligence in the administration of the routing configuration system, failure to maintain the inter-county transfer line, failure to enable available security features, and failure of the Emergency Communications Oversight Board to conduct meaningful technical audits. The suit is ongoing. The county has not yet filed a formal response. Cassandra Pruitt's phone, the one she called from, the one that was recovered from the kitchen counter 3 feet from where she was found, is still in the custody of the Fairview County Evidence Facility, tagged as Exhibit 4B in the Morrow case record. The call log on it shows one outgoing call to 911 at 11:52 on January 18th, 2024. Duration: 1 minute and 43 seconds. No one at the Fairview County Emergency Communications Center ever heard a second of it. 61 calls, 8 months, one man with secondary administrative access, a printed map, and 3 weeks of planning. 61 people who dialed 3 digits and trusted that the architecture between them and the answer would hold. 41 of them waited through a night that didn't have to go the way it went. And one of them, a 29-year-old dental hygienist who had moved 47 miles east to be safe, who kept a phone number she meant to change, who locked her door and stayed on the line for 1 minute and 43 seconds, never got to move on at all.